2016 Republican presidential candidate, Texas Senator Ted Cruz. Senator, good to see you again. Welcome back.
Sean, great to be with you.
I got to tell you, this has really become a slugfest in the minds. I have friends that support you. I have friends that support Trump. It's palpable, and there's almost like an anger that's building between the two camps. From your perspective, how do you see this competition?
Well, listen, I agree that Donald seems to be getting very angry. I mean, he's rattled and he's tossing out a lot of insults. I have no intention of responding in kind. I don't intend to insult him. In fact, I like Donald. I respect him. And I'm not interested in getting into a mudslinging fight. So if he wants to do that, that's his choice. But I won't be doing it. What I will be doing is keeping the race focused on issues and substance. I think that's what the voters expect. I think that's what they deserve. And right now, the men and women of this country are trying to make the determination who is best prepared to be commander-in-chief and who can we trust to be a consistent conservative. We're tired of getting burned. Who can we trust to actually deliver on and do what they'll do?
Do you now see this as a two-man race? I mean, I'm looking at polls. Obviously very tight in Iowa. It's pretty much a fight for second place, according to the polls in New Hampshire. You're in second place in South Carolina, second place in Florida, second place in Georgia, first place in Utah in a poll that came out this week.
Yeah.
Is it a two-man race in your mind?
You know, Sean, I think it very much is becoming a two-man race between me and Donald. And you know, one of the really strong signs of that is you're seeing the Washington establishment dumping their candidates. So, for example, a lot of the establishment had been behind Marco Rubio. They've decided now he doesn't have a path to victory. They're moving to Donald Trump, and we're seeing that more and more. And, you know, it's kind of curious. Donald is publicly bragging about how all the big establishment players are getting behind him. And his criticism of me is he said, I went to Washington and actually stood up and fought in Washington. And Donald has said, well, the problem he has with me is that I won't go along to get along in Washington. I won't cut deals. And Donald has promised he'll go to Washington, he'll cut deals, he'll go along to get along. Now, I got to tell you, Sean, you know the conservatives across this country. I don't think the problem with Washington is that we haven't had enough Republicans willing to cut deals with the Democrats. The problem is Republican leadership cuts deals every day with the Democrats, like this horrible omnibus bill that funded $1 trillion, funded all of Obama's big government priorities, and the establishment seems to have made a determination. You know, Donald Trump's a guy they can make a deal with who will continue the cronyism and corporate welfare and bailouts for big banks, and I think that we're seeing conservatives getting behind us, and we're seeing the Washington establishment getting behind Donald Trump, interestingly enough.
It's interesting you reveal it that way, because I've always thought the establishment despised both of you, and I don't mean that in a bad way. I'm a proud insurgent supporter of this election, because like you, I feel that Washington Republicans have failed us. When you say you're going to fight, for example, in 2010 the promise was repeal, replace Obamacare. They wouldn't use the power of the purse. 2014 it was stop executive amnesty. They funded it, and they've now punted it to the courts. How do you fight that battle if you get to be commander-in-chief? Explain the process in which you would be able to do that.
Look, the only way to fight that battle, I believe, is with a strong conservative president. Congressional leadership, they're simply not going to lead. But with a strong conservative president, it's an altogether different world. For one thing, the way Obama has abused his power, the tool he has used most often is executive authority. He's abused his constitutional power. The silver lining of that is everything done with executive power can be undone with executive power. That's why I pledged on day one to rescind every single illegal and unconstitutional executive action done by Barack Obama. It's why I pledged to direct the Department of Justice to open an investigation into Planned Parenthood and prosecute any criminal violation. It's why I pledged to end the persecution of religious liberty in the federal government. It's why I pledged to direct the Department of Education to end Common Core. A strong, vigorous executive can undo the damage of the Obama administration. But secondly, when it comes to Congress, a president that is prepared to say to congressional leadership, if you send me a bill that is filled with corporate welfare, that's filled with pork, that's filled with cronyism, I will veto it. That's what Reagan did, and it changed the entire direction of this country. That's exactly what I'm committed to doing as well.
Let's talk about the trajectory of the race. When you were recently on my radio show, you said, no, Iowa's not a must-win for the Cruz campaign, for your campaign. Talk about the path for the primary, through the primary, and tell me in a general election, what states do you believe a Ted Cruz candidacy could put in place either Hillary or Bernie or maybe Elizabeth Warren and Joe Biden? I don't know if Hillary, in fact, got indicted.
Well, we'll start with the primary where you asked. I think we are all in each of the first 4 states: Iowa, New Hampshire, South Carolina, Nevada. We've got amazing teams on the ground in each of the first 4 states. What we're seeing is conservatives coming together behind our campaign, and we're seeing the establishment coming together behind Donald Trump's campaign. I like those odds. There are more conservatives than there are the establishment. I believe we're well positioned to do really well in Iowa and New Hampshire and South Carolina and Nevada. And then 10 days after South Carolina's Super Tuesday, the SEC states: Georgia, Alabama, Tennessee, Arkansas, Oklahoma, Texas. I think Super Tuesday is going to be an amazing day for our campaign, where conservatives say, we don't want someone who views the job of president as let's expand the role of Washington, let's cut more deals with Harry Reid and Nancy Pelosi, let's have more cronyism and bailouts. And you know, we're seeing real distinctions on the issues. So, for example, Donald Trump enthusiastically supported the TARP bailout of big banks. I opposed it. He enthusiastically supported Barack Obama's stimulus plan. He thought it should have been bigger. I think it was a disaster and a waste of money. Actually, Donald not only supported both of those, but he argued that Obamacare should be expanded to make it socialized medicine for everyone. Actually, Donald Trump and Bernie Sanders have basically the same health care plan. I disagree. As president, I will sign legislation. We will repeal every word of Obamacare. So there's a sharp policy distinction, and I think in the primary, Republican voters want a conservative. They don't want a deal maker who has written checks and supported Hillary Clinton and Mitch McConnell and John Boehner and Chuck Schumer. They want instead a principled Reagan conservative.
Maybe Donald Trump took the biggest shot. He actually compared you to Hillary Clinton. I want to ask you about that. And you had 2 people come out, one against you and one for Donald Trump. Governor Palin's endorsement. She had endorsed you for the Senate. And Governor Branstad and his comments saying anybody pretty much but Ted Cruz. Your reaction to all those comments?
Oh, listen, Sarah Palin, I love Sarah Palin. I wouldn't be in the Senate without her support. She's made her decision for 2016. That's her prerogative. Regardless of that decision, I will remain a big fan of Sarah Palin's. And I do think the decision of who is the consistent conservative, who's the genuine conservative, that's a decision that's going to be made by the men and women of Iowa, by the men and women of New Hampshire and South Carolina and the states that are voting. As for Governor Branstad, you know, it's actually interesting. That is an example of the establishment getting behind Donald Trump, of the Washington cartel getting behind Donald Trump. And in fact, the governor's explanation for why is he wants a leader like Donald Trump who will continue the mandates, the ethanol mandate, and in fact expand it. You know, my view is we should have no mandates at all, no subsidies, no Washington picking winners and losers, no cronyism, but rather a level playing field. That's why my tax plan is a simple flat tax, 10% for everybody, no mandates, no subsidies for oil and gas, no subsidies for ethanol, for wind, for solar, for anybody else. Washington is not in the influence-playing business. We bring power back to the people. I think that's what the Republican voters are looking for.
And when we come back, we'll have more with Senator Ted Cruz. He'll give his closing arguments heading into Iowa. Back with more Reaction 2016. Republican presidential candidate Senator Ted Cruz. Senator, this seems to be getting more serious. The Intelligence Community Inspector General, Charles McCullough, laid out findings after review by the intelligence agencies identifying several dozen additional classified emails, including special access programs, SAP, a level of classification beyond top secret. Now, that would be multiple felonies that we're talking about here.
Yeah.
Do you suspect she might not end up being the nominee, but might end up being indicted?
Listen, these are very serious charges coming from the Inspector General. The SAP files, which is the higher level of classification, the reason they get that higher level of classification is because you can reveal intelligence collection methods and sources. The reason it has that classification is you don't want our covert operatives at risk, potentially at risk of being compromised or even kidnapped or murdered by revealing the information, the intelligence that they have collected. And for her to have this on an unsecured server that I guess it was reported was in a bathroom somewhere, that is a very, very serious allegation. And I would note General Petraeus was criminally prosecuted, and right now the Obama Pentagon is trying to strip him of one of his stars for doing what appears on the face to be much, much less than Hillary Clinton did. It really raises the suspicion that the Obama White House is behaving as it always does, putting politics ahead of the law and ahead of defending this nation's interest in national security.
I want to go back to what came up in the debate, this New York values issue. It was an issue that came up that I took personally, and the result was I got many invitations to become citizens of other states or certainly move to those states. But Andrew Cuomo said this about conservatives. I want you to listen.
Who are they? Are they these extreme conservatives who are right to life, pro-assault weapon, anti-gay? Is that who they are? Because if that's who they are, and if they are the extreme conservatives, they have no place in the state of New York. Because that's not who New Yorkers are.
I'm pro-life. I am pro-Second Amendment. I'm pro-traditional marriage. I'm not anti-anything. That is a pretty severe thing for the governor of a state to say, basically saying I'm not wanted in this state. And they do take a lot of my tax money. I will point out to you, nearly 10% state, nearly 4% city tax. Your reaction?
Well, look, that comment reflects the arrogance of the big government liberals who have been running New York politics for a long time. That comment manifests exactly what New York values are. And you know, I would note that the phrase New York values, when I brought it up, it came originally from Donald Trump. From his own words, he did an interview with Tim Russert, long interview, where he explained his views, that he was very, very, very pro-choice, that he supported partial birth abortion, which is really an extreme view on the issue of life, that he was in favor of partial birth abortion, and he was open to gay marriage because he had been born and raised in New York. And his background, he said he has the views of New York, and the New York views and New York values are different, and he explicitly says they're different from Iowa values. Well, he's right in that. And it's interesting that Donald took such offense when I repeated his own words and said, well, he reflects New York values.
You apologized to New Yorkers on my radio show.
I did indeed. I apologized to the millions of conservatives in New York who've been abandoned by liberal politicians. I apologized to all the men and women that want to work in New York but can't because Governor Cuomo has banned fracking, and so they don't get high-paying jobs that people just south in Pennsylvania get. I apologize to all of the African-American children who Mayor de Blasio tried to throw out of their charter schools, which were giving them a lifeline to the American dream. And I apologized in particular to the cops and to the firefighters and all the 9/11 heroes who had no choice but stand and turn their back on Mayor de Blasio because over and over again he sides with the criminals and looters rather than the brave men and women of blue.
Let me give you an opportunity. We're going to be in Iowa next week, so I assume we'll have you on the program at least one more time before the Iowa caucuses. But in fairness, I'll give Mr. Trump. I agree this is right now looking like a two-man race, an opportunity to do so as well. But closing arguments, policy differences, foreign policy, the Iranian deal. What would a Ted Cruz, Senator Cruz, President Cruz White House look like versus, in your mind, a Donald White House?
Well, Sean, every one of us has had the experience of supporting politicians who say good things on the campaign trail and then they don't do what they say. It's why people are so frustrated with Republican leadership in Congress, because we were promised if we had Republican majorities in Congress, they would do something. They wouldn't just cut deals with Harry Reid and the Democrats. So what I would suggest to voters, don't listen to what any of the candidates say on the campaign trail. Campaign rhetoric is cheap. Ignore what I say, ignore what Donald says. Look to our records. Who has actually stood up and fought? If you say you're going to take on Washington, when have you stood up and led the fight? For example, every Republican says they oppose Obamacare. The question you ought to ask, in 2013, when we had an epic drag-down battle, where were you in that fight? I was standing with millions of Americans leading the fight against Obamacare. Mr. Trump was nowhere to be found. He was not part of that fight. He didn't show up for that fight. In 2013, when Harry Reid and Barack Obama and Chuck Schumer came after the Second Amendment right to keep and bear arms, millions of Americans rose up to defend our constitutional rights. Once again, I was proud to lead that fight. Once again, Mr. Trump was nowhere to be found. He had been advocating previously for restricting so-called assault weapons, and when it came a time to defend the Second Amendment, he wasn't there. And even on amnesty, you know, on the campaign trail, Donald likes to talk a lot about amnesty. Well, we had an epic drag-down battle in 2013 on amnesty, where President Obama and Chuck Schumer joined with establishment Republicans like Marco Rubio to push through a massive amnesty plan. And it passed the Senate. It was about to pass the House. You remember, Sean, Republican leadership in the House was going to join with the Democrats and pass it over the objections of Republicans. And I stood shoulder to shoulder with Jeff Sessions and Steve King and millions of Americans defending our sovereignty, standing against amnesty, fighting to secure the borders. On the other side was Marco Rubio, who's with Chuck Schumer and Barack Obama. And missing from the entire battle was Donald Trump. If he cared about this issue so much, where was he when the fight was on the verge of being lost? And if millions of us hadn't risen up, Barack Obama would have granted amnesty to 12 million people here illegally, and we would have lost this battle. And what I would suggest is the scriptures tell us, you shall know them by their fruits. Don't listen to the words of the candidates. Look at the walk and the action. That's how we determine, and I'll make one final point. The most important determination anyone is making in this election is who's prepared to be commander-in-chief, who has the experience, who has the knowledge, who has the clarity of vision, the strength of resolve, and the judgment to keep this country safe. If I am elected president, we will defeat radical Islamic terrorism. We will utterly destroy ISIS. And Iran will not get nuclear weapons. I will rip to shreds this Iranian nuclear deal. Donald Trump has pledged to keep the deal in place and try to negotiate. You don't negotiate with the Ayatollah Khamenei who chants death to America. You defeat him. And we need a leader who doesn't get rattled by the latest drop in polls, who doesn't wake up in the morning with a frenzy of tweets, but rather has the clarity of vision and strength to keep this country safe. That's what I'll do as president, John, and I think that's why conservatives are uniting behind us all across the country. It's why the establishment is headed to Donald.
All right, Senator, we'll be in Iowa most of next week, and we'll hopefully see you and all the other candidates there. Thank you so much. Only 12 days to go.